Hi, guys, welcome to another episode of the Iraqi Nutrition Podcast. I'm your host, Juma Iraqi, and today I have brought back my good friend, Eric Helms. Eric, how are you doing today?
I'm wonderful. It's good to be back.
Thank you for agreeing to do this podcast, and we're going to talk about pre-contest diets today. Um,
Love it.
but before we start, could you give us a short introduction about yourself?
Sure. For those who didn't listen to the first time, my name's Eric, and I am currently at the tail end, maybe the last quarter of my PhD at the Auckland University of Technology, studying strength and conditioning here in New Zealand. But I'm American. I've been here for a little over 4 years now. I also have a master's degree in exercise science and a master's degree in sports nutrition related topic, specifically looking at manipulating macronutrients and protein in dieting strength athletes. So it'll be good to talk about that today. And I'm also one of the four co-owners and one of the five coaches of 3D Muscle Journey, a coaching business for drug-free athletes. And I also compete in natural bodybuilding and powerlifting myself.
Excellent. Have you been competing in bodybuilding lately, or has it just been powerlifting?
I've taken a hiatus from competing in bodybuilding until I finish my PhDs, but I am planning on getting back on stage, doing my pro debut, probably 2018, maybe 2017, but probably not likely. But I have been doing powerlifting.
Okay. Which show are you going to do then for the bodybuilding?
Um, Not sure yet. There's a bunch of shows in the States. We'll have to figure out one that works with the timing. I'd love to get on stage with the rest of the coaches, so sort that out.
Okay, excellent. And you also have two cats?
I do.
Yeah.
Milo and Bucky.
Yeah. Which
One is very fancy. He always wears a tuxedo. The other is a little more street. He kind of always wears just gray and brown.
is that the one that always does the Skype consultations?
Yep. In fact, boom.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
So
Nice. Okay, so like I said, today's topic is pre-contest dieting, and I thought we would start off with a question regarding what are the typical mistakes that you see people do during pre-contest.
yeah, I would say probably the most typical and most the mistake that has the largest consequences are that people underestimate how much body fat they have to lose, and then they underestimate how much time it'll take to lose it, and then that basically that initial mistake forces a bunch of other mistakes, like having to cut calories too low, doing too much cardio, and then taking a peak week approach, which is very kind of wishing on a star and hoping that some massive changes are going to happen in the last minute, to include big time depletion, cutting water, messing with electrolytes, and things that probably wouldn't even work even if they were shredded. But they're hoping on some kind of magic formula in the end. Most people tend to be off, if they're a male of a normal size, by maybe 5-6 kilos with their estimation of how much body fat they need to lose, and then often they will give themselves kind of like the minimum amount of time, assuming they lose maximal fat per week, versus probably they'd be better suited towards taking a slower approach and including things like diet breaks, refeeds, etc. So, yeah, that's probably the most common mistake in my opinion.
Yeah, and I actually had Alberto Nunez, your colleague, on the show. We were talking about the peak week and how less of an effect when we were looking at the whole picture that the peak week has compared to diet. Because, like you said, a lot of people they try to fix things during the peak week instead of actually saying that, you know what, I didn't take enough time to diet down, and I should probably shoot for another show. But
Yep.
since you're a competitor yourself, what are the biggest mistakes you have made in your career?
Well, that was a mistake I made my very first season, and I probably did better than most. I gave myself about 20 weeks my first season, and this we were talking 2007, so this was before people were really bought into taking longer time periods, and before people were doing, diet breaks on a regular basis, which is still not even that common, but it's something that I'd like to think is a little more popular. And so, yeah, I had to basically I took it easy in the beginning and had to really rush it at the end, which, if anything, is kind of the opposite of what you want to do. When you have higher body fat levels and you've had a lot less adaptations to dieting, it's much easier to sustain a higher deficit. And, I was still doing things like once a week having a meal out and not counting it, and just kind of feeling like, oh, I've got 20 weeks, that's forever. So the first 4, 5, 6 weeks, I was a little more lax. And then in the end, I was just adding cardio or cutting calories on a weekly basis, just trying to play catch up. That was probably my biggest mistake. I also was just very uncertain in general. Like, I did a lot of things that I thought might be bullshit, but I did them anyway, just kind of in case. So I remember I didn't combine carbs and fats to a very high degree. I try to keep my fat low and high carb meals, and vice versa, because maybe insulin is a problem. I don't know. I'm young and not very educated, and I was eating every 2.5 to 3 hours, and I was having a high meal frequency for hopefully the benefits of energy expenditure. So yeah, there's a few kind of bro-y things going on there. I also was just making poor decisions in terms of food selection. Like, I was having, I cut protein bars in half to hit my macro sometimes, or have drink some calories, and I found that I was just really, really hungry in 2007 for probably a lot of reasons, but that didn't help. So yeah.
And how, these mistakes that you've made, what have you learned from? How have your approach changed during the last couple of years?
Yeah, well, a big thing I learned is that the consequences to those mistakes, they may show up while you're dieting, or the consequences may happen afterwards. So for me personally, I had a huge rebound weight gain and struggled with binge eating for almost 2 months post-competition, my first season. So that was kind of one of the things that actually motivated me to start forming some type of coaching service and some type of information service. It was kind of the seeds of 3D Muscle Journey from my side of it, in that we wanted to provide, help to other athletes to help them avoid that, that pain, really that lack of happiness and fulfillment in competing. So yeah, I think some of the things that I've learned and I've changed now are simply taking more time, taking as a much more moderate approach in terms of the way I think about the diet in and of itself, and trying to be even more targeted, instead of micromanaging every single detail. It's finding out what details do make a difference, focusing on them, and then trying to really get my mind on something else when I'm not in the gym or in the kitchen. So I think a lot of it has been mental, but it has been facilitated by having appropriate targets, I guess you could say.
Excellent. So what were your cravings for when you binged it for 2 months? Ben and Jerry's?
And everything, because I had such a limited amount of food that I allowed myself to eat during the prep. I think I was eating sweet potatoes, brown rice, tuna, chicken, whey protein, almond butter, and broccoli and nuts, and that was maybe it. Anything that wasn't on that list, I had a craving for. You name it. Yeah. So Chipotle, Chinese food, pizza, ice cream. I literally ate myself into terrible body composition. I was 80 kgs on stage, right around there ish, maybe 81. Maybe 7 or 8% body fat. And then by the time 2 months later, I was 103, 102, 103 at 23% body fat or something like that.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So yeah, it was a rapid rise in body fat very quickly.
Yeah, that was a huge gain in 2 months. But I think a lot of people that do compete in bodybuilding once in their career has done, maybe they're not that extreme, but something similar to that.
I've also seen worse, believe it or not. Yeah. So I'm certainly on the tail end of how bad it can be.
Yeah.
My personal experience, but I've definitely seen worse.
Yeah. So when you work with when you work with clients, like how do you determine how many weeks you'll have to spend during the pre-con? Do you go by body fat percentage, the pictures? Do you have like you add a couple of weeks extra in case things turn up during the pre-contest? What's your approach to it?
So ideally, the way it works is someone contacts us in the off season, well in advance of when they want to compete. And part of our goal of consulting together in the off season, this is 3DMJ wide, is determining how well they respond to, slow surplus in the off season, and then the mini cuts, getting a diet history from them, and also helping them get to a body fat level that's appropriate for starting a diet. So that they're more like 20 or 10 kilos over, 10 kilos over stage weight if they're like a middleweight male kind of size, so that it doesn't have to be this long drawn out thing. Most people need between, say, on average, if things are going right, I would say 5 to 7 months if you really want to have a well balanced approach that also can you can take your foot off the gas and take a diet break sometimes. And ensures that you're maintaining a lot of muscle mass and performance, and most importantly, sanity. Some people can get away with less, not very often, but especially when we're talking like bodybuilding divisions where you have to be very lean, that could be 4 to 5 months. Some people need more. I have a very tough time getting into true stage condition without really just crashing my calories, so it takes me more like 8 months personally. So yeah, typically the way it works is someone contacts us maybe a year out from their show. Not that we're going to start dieting a year out. And we'll get on Skype, talk about their goals, get their diet history. They've already completed an application, which is going to have their entire history. This also gets looked at by our in-house RD, who we've recently added to the team, Steve Taylor. And just to make sure that everything makes sense from on the clinical side of it, based on the information that we get from them. So we know what they've done in the past, how lean they've gotten, their dietary history as even before they started competing, and then we also use pictures. That's our primary thing: is current pictures and pictures of the last time they got on stage, if they did compete prior, and then we formulate a number of off-season Skypes with them to try to work their nutrition and their body comp to a place where it's ideal for starting prep, along with their mindset. Wanting someone motivated, not burned out at the start of a prep, with calories as high as they can be and body fat at a reasonable level. Then ideally, you can start a prep in that 5 to 7 months out period. And if everything goes well, the end of the diet is not necessarily cutting, but actually increasing calories into the show, which is, maybe happens half or less than half the time. But when it can happen, it's a very powerful tool for making sure you bring your best to the stage. But you've got to get ready early to do that.
Yeah, excellent. In regards to nutrition, you did a review paper with Alan Aragon regarding nutrition recommendations for natural bodybuilders during pre-contest. Could you just give us the key findings that you found during the review?
Yeah, the rundown. So myself, Alan Aragon, and Peter Fitchen. And those who don't know who those guys are, A, shame on you, but B, really excellent stuff. You want to consume everything they've ever put out. Alan Aragon has a fantastic research review. He's coached bodybuilders to the stage successfully. Peter is also he's a doctorate in, I want to say, nutritional sciences, and he's a natural pro bodybuilder. So great information from both of them. But the paper is essentially, we did a big review of basically a kind of guided review towards giving evidence-based recommendations on manipulating nutrition for contest prep. So we searched all the research we had at the time. I believe we wrote it in 2013, got it published in 2014 officially, and covered everything that was relevant to bodybuilders. So we talked about macronutrient distribution, meal frequency and timing, bunch of stuff. So probably the main findings that we put out there were losing weight at a target of 0.5 to 1% of your body weight per week. This allows a good macronutrient distribution. It allows adequate calories. It allows training to occur effectively. It allows basically all the things that taking too short of a diet forces you into making decisions that aren't going to be useful for you. And we recommend following the higher rate of weight loss earlier in the prep when you have more body fat to lose and closer to that 0.5% per week as you are leaner and leaner and leaner. So that's a huge one. So that kind of dictates your calorie intake based on the rough 3,500 calorie per pound of body fat rule. Protein kind of echoes my protein recommendations from the review I wrote prior to that, somewhere in the range of, say, if you want to use just grams per kilo, 1.8 to 2.8 grams per kg, or if we're talking about lean body mass, somewhere between 2 to 3 grams per kg of lean body mass protein. Then setting fat up around minimum 15% of calories and up to, say, 25, 30% based on other research and other reviews, and then remaining calories from carbohydrate. I would also put forth that you probably want to have some functional minimums there based on body weight. So, like, don't go below 0.5 grams per kg of fat unless it's for very, very short periods and you have a concerted effort that you need to do, and then you're going to bring it back up. Same thing with carbohydrates, but around probably 1 gram per kg. We reviewed a lot of things. Like, we talked about how little research there is on ketogenic dieting in bodybuilders, and while it may be okay in certain populations, it probably doesn't match up very well with the demands of contest prep and getting to very, very lean levels and maintaining performance. But we said, we need more research to really confirm that. We also talked about meal frequency and timing. And so somewhere between the range of 3 to 6 meals per day is probably going to maximize any benefit to protein distribution and also avoid any issues with satiety. On either side of it, eating too frequently, you have these very small meals all the time, which tends to stimulate hunger rather than satisfy it. And if you have very few meals, not in everyone, but some people will find that going very long periods between meals is a problem. And certainly there's exceptions to that. That I'm sure there's some people who are in the intermittent fasting crowd who are listening to that and going, oh man, no, 2 meals per day has freed me. But for every one of those people, you'll find, typically who are 20-something, males who aren't never hungry at breakfast. But you find your 40-year-old woman who wants to compete, who is starving at breakfast and gets absolutely crushed by intermittent fasting. So anyway, in general, somewhere between 3 to 6 meals, roughly even distribution of protein, and consuming some of that protein sandwiching your resistance training. So we're talking about, say, 0.4 to 0.5 grams per kg, 1 to 2 hours prior and post, just to maximize any theoretical benefits of protein timing around training. And those are the big take-home messages for the most part. I mean, we have a lot of other information in there that we reviewed, to include, talking about methods of trying to assign macronutrient distributions based on things like skin fold measurements, or somatotypes, which really don't have any evidence behind them, either one, that there would be a macronutrient distribution that goes along with being an endomorph, an ectomorph, or a mesomorph, or having certain skin fold calipers on your subscapular region or anything like that. So a lot of that's going to come down to personal preference, and it could potentially be modified by, insulin sensitivity or resistance. But in most competitors, they're not going to be insulin resistant. So I think personal preference and adherence is a big piece of it. Mm-hmm. And one thing we touched on, but probably could have talked more about, are the TDEE adaptations to dieting, and how variable that can be, and how it goes down, and then the different compartments and components of it, whether it is actually your BMR going down, or is it your NEAT, and to how much, and to what degree, and what pattern does it follow. So that was touched on, but didn't contain a big section of the review. But yeah.
Did you touch up on supplements that would be beneficial during the pre-contest diet as well?
Yes, we did. We talked about peak week. We talked about supplements, and we also talked about behavioral stuff as they relate to food. So for supplements, and we would probably update this now, I would say, we primarily recommended that things that had evidence basis that would be beneficial for bodybuilders. Creatine monohydrate, and we also recommended caffeine. And we talked about how the effects are. Well, this is actually wasn't discussed in the review, but a good thing to remember is that caffeine can suppress tiredness and it also can potentially enhance performance, but it actually takes a pretty high dosage. We're talking 4 to 6 milligrams per kg before we're enhancing potential like anaerobic or strength performance, and that's quite high. And that with tolerance, that suppression of tiredness seems to fade. So you kind of have to think about that as a contest prep dieter. Is would you rather, with tolerance, the performance enhancing effect fades. So you have to think about it. Do you want to take your caffeine intermittently for very hard workouts to try to improve performance, or would you rather take kind of like a regular dose like most humans do, or most adults do in Western society? Not even Western society, many societies who want to just not feel as tired, which gets worse during prep. So decision to make there. We also recommended beta-alanine, but also talked about how, for the most part, it seems to be effective in that 60 to 240 second range, which, when you really think about it, is not much resistance training. And a recent meta-analysis that came out after we wrote that paper basically had a conclusion, beta-alanine doesn't do too much. And so for the most part, I think I would probably agree with that statement. And more research has also come out on citrulline malate, which we were rather nebulous with. We kind of said, hey, it needs more research. Well, actually, a tremendous amount of research has been done in the last 2 years since we wrote that. And right now, if you were to ask me whether I'd recommend beta-alanine or citrulline malate to a bodybuilder, I would probably say citrulline malate, as it seems to have clear effects in probably 3 or 4 studies I've seen on resistance training outcomes in terms of like total volume that one produces, even when resting like 3 minutes on leg and upper body training. Some recent studies I've seen. So the supplement stuff, that's probably what will need to be updated the most on a regular basis if you were to write a updated version of that article. We also talked about branched chain amino acids being probably the most frequently used, but one of the not so supported supplements out there that doesn't have a lot of good data behind it. And we talked about other forms of creatine, which have been investigated, which typically fall short of creatine monohydrate. And we also talked about multivitamin use, which hasn't been directly studied in this population, but we've got a couple meta-analyses that show no harmful effect and even a potential small benefit for overall mortality. So we know they're safe, and we also know that people who diet, especially bodybuilders from older surveys, typically have micronutrient deficiencies related to either food selection that's very limited or just having low calories or a combination of the two. So we said, more research is needed, but it wouldn't be a bad idea to perhaps have a low-dose multivitamin as kind of a safety net.
Yeah, excellent. And regarding the caffeine dosage that you were talking about, I've seen a couple of these soccer teams now. They actually take caffeine during the halftime, and they take it in a form of chewing gum. So they put 4 to 5 pieces of these huge chewing gums in their mouth. So it gives 400 to 500 milligrams of caffeine because each gum has 100. And one of the coaches told me that a lot of the guys really feel the benefit, but they really struggle to chew so many pieces. But it gets absorbed rapidly, so they don't have to chew a lot from it.
Wow. Yeah. That's I would imagine that going to sleep that night would be hard for them.
Yeah, I think so too.
Depending on when the game is.
They usually play around 4 or 5 p.m. Oof, so yeah. With that,
so 500 milligrams at 5 p.m. Good times.
Yeah, good times. You also wrote a review paper regarding training and cardio as well, and this is a topic I want to go a bit deep into, because usually you see these typical bodybuilding protocols where you use compound movements in the off season, you lift heavy weights, but as soon as pre-contest starts, you switch over to isolation movements and high reps. Could you just touch a bit upon why people, what's the theory behind it, and what's your recommendation for training?
Sure. Yeah. So we also wrote a companion paper that was published in a different journal, and who Brad Schoenfeld also was on, based on how to do your resistance training for contest prep as well. So the theory of what has been traditionally done, where you will typically see volume go up, rep range go up, and even the choice of exercises change to more isolation work. The theory is that doing high reps makes muscle look leaner or helps you lose fat. And I wouldn't say it's completely false, because you could make an argument that perhaps this is more glycogen depleting, which maybe drives up fat oxidation. And you'll see some stuff by Lyle McDonald encouraging some depletion work, but it's never to replace the heavy work. It is maybe as an adjunct type of training. And even though, there's some good theory behind it, I would say that it doesn't have really any empirical data backing it, of actually comparing, two groups doing two different types of training and seeing whether one loses more fat, that I'm aware of. And I personally think, and from the efforts that I put out and seen with my athletes, that it's that when you're in the weight room, it's not fat burning time, it's muscle retention time, or even at the beginning of prep, potentially even still trying to gain a very small amount. I think what typically happens is over the course of a prep, you're either you're maintaining or slightly gaining at the beginning, and then once you get to very low levels of body fat and much lower levels of food and higher levels of cardio, that becomes a losing battle. But the net change over time does matter. So anyway, what our argument was in our paper was that when you start to diet, the rules for how muscle grows don't change. And the things that helped someone, or the optimal approaches to gaining muscle, would therefore be the optimal approaches towards training, even when the goal is more so trying to maintain as much muscle as possible. Because really all training does is stimulate these spikes in protein synthesis, right? So, and whether you're losing muscle or not just has to do with whether net muscle protein balance, it becomes a negative in the end. And I think it's useful to point out, although we didn't point this out in the paper, is that there's no such thing as really I'm in a calorie deficit or a surplus. This isn't a light switch that gets turned on and off. Between meals, if you've gone long enough, you're going to be in a deficit regardless of if you're in the off season or the in season. And likewise, within an hour of you eating, your body is going to be in a storage state, that postprandial state. You are going to be in a quote unquote surplus for that time period. And really what dictates, net body composition changes are going to be those peaks and valleys of, protein degradation and protein synthesis, and, fat synthesis, and also fat oxidation, right? And certainly, especially in certain populations or with drug use, you will see people who can, gain muscle. The rules aren't so black and white. And that's not to say that only people on gear will do it. But if you have a novice or someone high in body fat, or someone with, like I said at the start of a prep, with a very effective approach, if they're going from 15% body fat to 13% body fat and they gain, 300 grams of muscle, that's not uncommon at all. So really, I think it's important to get out of this mindset of dieting. The best thing you can do is maintain muscle. That may be the case if you look at an entire 24-week prep, but the approach should still be, I'm trying to have an optimal approach for training. However, that doesn't mean that you can do the same things you did in the off season. So some things do need to change, because you can only do so much work that's beneficial if you can recover from it. And when you're dieting, and as you do more cardio, and as your food gets lower and lower, and as you become mentally and psychologically stressed due to the diet, your recovery is going to become more and more hindered. So while the basic fundamentals of training for hypertrophy remain the same, doing things like having a regular planned deloads, using an RPE scale to change your intensity, having a flexible approach to your day-to-day selection of training, basically using auto-regulation, using deloads, and on the coach's side of it, being very aware the subjective feedback you get from your client and the tools you have at your disposal to manage that stress, I think becomes even more important. And typically, there are points along the way where I will definitely drop volume intentionally on someone, just because I think that would be more productive than actually doing less and having them, recover and have the whole diet, the rest of their training days, and their cardio all get improved because they're not doing that fifth or fourth set of squats, that just wrecks them that day and on subsequent days. It also lowers the risk of injury, doesn't suppress their immune system as much, all that kind of stuff. So the general principles remain the same. However, you just have to really keep an eye on managing fatigue and recovery.
Yeah, and that makes sense as well if you actually think about it, that volume has to be adjusted as soon as calories are lowered and you're doing maybe a bit more cardio training during your pre-contest. And that's why it's also good to have a flexible system. So I actually do it with my clients. We don't usually have like chest on Mondays, legs on Tuesdays, stuff like that. We usually have day 1, 2, 3, and they just adjust it based on how they recover and how they feel. And that way it doesn't, like, if you miss let's say you miss legs on Tuesday, it doesn't cause backup and you have to. Yeah. So it makes it a whole lot easier to stick to the plan, and if you take a day off extra, you just do the next session the next time you're in the gym. That's why I also don't like having fixed workouts on fixed days, but the backside of it is people that don't train on weekends, for example, that might cause a problem for them. So yeah, there's actually a little bit of empirical data on this. So there was a study in 2010 by McNamara and Stern on flexible nonlinear periodization, where basically within each block of training, or I believe mesocycle, they could choose which of the 3 optional workouts they had on their 3 assigned days. They trained or two assigned days. They trained twice a week. This is a college weight training class. And they could choose 1 of 3 workouts, but they had to complete all of the assigned workouts within that block of training. So basically, they did all the same work. So the total program was volume matched to the other group and intensity matched if you look at the whole period. But they could basically slot in the workouts where they wanted, and they ended up getting actually more strength than the group that had a fixed schedule. So they would come in and give a 1 to 10 energy level score, and then use that score to inform them on what choice they made. And lo and behold, they actually did better. So having basically some kind of structured flexibility and a auto-regulation protocol was better. And then more recently, in trained subjects, there was a study by Calhoun, which was just recently published, on a flexible daily undulating periodization plan. And while this one didn't beat out the other group, they had similar results. And depending on how you look at the stats, you could say maybe slightly better adherence or completion in the group that had a flexible approach. It wasn't a huge difference, but basically, it was the same. So the way I see it is, if people can do what they want and they get the same results, then why not, kind of thing. Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, there's definitely something to that. And there was a one rather large difference, in my opinion, between these studies, is that McNamara and Stern, you could have a lot more ability to modify the program over weeks, while the flexible DUP program, because it's daily undulating, meaning you can only shuffle 1 week around a little bit. So the models are going to be constrained, but the philosophy behind them can be applied in a lot of different ways. Personally, something I do with my clients is I will give them, I won't give them days of the week to train. I'll give them day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like you do. Yeah. And then for their accessory work, their like isolation stuff, I'll just give them a list, and I say, hey, slot this in where you want, so they can make one session longer or shorter, or take an extra day, so that they can really have a lot more flexibility in the way they do that. And this is more often when I'll have like a percentage-based or RPE-based program on their like 3 or 4 main lifts. They might have like squat, bench, deadlift, and row, and that they have a fixed percentage kind of undulation pattern that they can slot in, whichever days of the week they want, so long as it's in order. But then a list of kind of more linearly progressed accessory movements that they can spread out as they want, that kind of look more like the way I have your training done at the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, if you were to give your 3 best tips for a successful pre-contest diet, what would they be?
Good question. So give yourself enough time is huge. I think that allows you to take a more aggressive approach at the beginning and slow down towards the end. Also allows you to do a couple things which I would recommend, of having diet breaks, say every 1 to 2 months. So that's basically a week at maintenance, and allows you to have, a refeed once or twice per week, where you just go to maintenance again. I think those are all very useful strategies for maintaining energy expenditure, lean body mass, and sanity. So I'll categorize that all as one of my main tips. The second one would be think about contest prep only as much as you need to. So meaning hit your macros, do your training, do your cardio, and then get back to life. I think is a very useful way of doing it, because it's very easy to become obsessive, and that becomes a negative in and of itself. And then thirdly, as far as training, have a structured training approach similar to what you do in the off season, that, with an evidence-based approach, and then do more things to ensure recovery. And don't get in the mindset of like, oh, if I do a deload while I'm in a deficit, it's just going to be all the muscles going to lose. Like, no, you really have to think about fatigue management. So maybe that's a regular deload every 4th week, no matter what, even if you're feeling pretty good, just to make sure that you're erring on the side of recovery. And then consider using things like an RPE scale versus percentage 1RM towards the end, so that you can lower the load down if need be. If you think of your volume along a spectrum of what's appropriate, probably keep it on the lower end of the spectrum, especially when you get into the last, say, third of your diet.
Excellent advice. Okay, Rick. Final question. This is a topic that I'm really interested in, and where there isn't a whole lot of research on this topic. Let's first talk about what are the negative effects of gaining too much weight fast after you've done with your pre-contest diet.
I think the main negative is that it's really psychologically stressful. And this so much so that it has prompted a whole lot of debate and a lot of different approaches to what do you do post contest. The reverse diet is something that has been popularized, and is basically the thought is, how do we manage this period? Because it's very common to see people experience what I experienced, where you put on 20 kgs of body weight, 22 kgs of body weight, and it's 90% fat. So at the end of a contest prep, you are in a place where you are very close to maximally down-regulating your energy expenditure. You've lost a fair amount of lean body mass, or just a certain amount. You've lost some. You're not going to be at your biggest compared to when you're in the off season, and you are very, very stressed, and you're very, very hungry. So all of that together can result in seeing your body composition fade into oblivion very quickly, which can be psychologically damaging. So it's very easy, after having this intense focus on getting to the stage and having the 6-month period where you're just grinding, everything's pushing towards getting on the stage, to then going, now what? You get this very normal kind of post-contest prep blues, empty nest syndrome of not necessarily having a concrete goal. And that also takes the handcuffs off you. For most bodybuilders, they're able to prevent binges for the most part, that are at least, to the point that they're getting in the way of their ability to get on stage, because they have a goal, and structured, it's clear in front of them, that it helps them adhere. So once that's taken away and they have all these hunger signals, it's so much easier to justify eating. So the common result is a rapid gain in body fat, and the psychological stress that comes from that can sometimes manifest in then trying to diet it back off. And you get this kind of pseudo bulimia that I would almost describe, where not necessarily in the sense that they're throwing up, although that actually has happened with some people. It's not that uncommon, but more so kind of like either massive amounts of cardio or severe restriction following these binge eating episodes to try to control the rate of weight gain or try to maintain condition or just to try to prevent obesity, really, because depending on the individual. So there also has been postulated, and this hasn't been shown in humans, that rapid fat gain in that state can result in an increase in the actual number of fat cells. So if you add a moderate amount of fat, but very, very quickly, that could result in making it harder to diet next time. I don't think, in my view, that plays out in the real world in bodybuilders, because even before the reverse diet, you'd see experienced competitors, even those who are totally fine with gaining all the weight back that they lost over 6 months and 1 month, or even say 3 to 4 weeks. They typically don't have a harder time, dieting in subsequent seasons. They have an easier time, and that's probably more behavioral than anything else. So that's not something I'm personally worried about. Maybe if you literally got, from stage ready to class 1 obesity within weeks, that would happen. But I wouldn't be worried about someone getting back to their pre-contest weight within a month or so. So anyway, the approach that we take, that we think is based on treating the person as a person rather than like a robot, is what we call the recovery diet, where the goal is within roughly 4 to 6 weeks to be 5 to 10% over stage weight. So that means if you competed at, say, 70 kg, you want to be between 74 to 77 within about a month. So it's an intentional surplus. It's allowing that post-contest meal, but it's just having some kind of limit on it. So we typically still give someone macronutrient, make them more flexible, give a broader range, allow eating out again once or twice a week, but they basically intentionally gain weight until they for a relatively aggressive period, and then we start to slow it down. And the reason is that there's really no reason to be in stage condition unless you want to be on stage. And in fact, being in stage condition, if you look at the studies we have on the case studies on bodybuilders and then the few studies we have, it's a very stressful place to be in, both mentally and psychologically, in terms of suppressing hormonal output, subjective rating scores and tiredness, things like that. And mechanistically, we know that the largest thing that increases leptin output and has all these favorable hormonal states is not the amount of food you eat, but the amount of body fat you have. So if there's no reason to be at 5%, 6% body fat except for getting a trophy, and if we know that the thing that's going to help you recover the fastest is actually putting on body fat, then we want to intentionally put on a reasonable amount of body fat and then slow it down. So we're looking to get to someone from, say, 6% body fat to, say, 10% body fat with relative expediency. And from that point, that's when we take that slower approach and try to mitigate fat gains. Because taking the much, much slower approach, where you take 4 weeks to even come out of a deficit, and then you're slowly adding calories from there, even if on paper or theoretically, which I actually don't agree with, that it would help you, maintain more muscle mass or stay leaner in the off season, that you're sacrificing maybe 3 to 4 months of time you could potentially be building muscle, and 90% of people aren't going to be able to adhere to that anyway. Even the most hardcore bodybuilders would tell you that the post-contest period, when you try to do that slow reverse approach, is damn near impossible, and even they slip up once or twice. So yeah, it's pretty much not going to get followed as it's supposed to be on paper anyway. B, I do think it actually just prolongs all the negative side effects of prep. And let's say you are able to be slightly leaner in the off season by 1 or 2% body fat percentage points. That's going to be offset by spending 3 months of time not able to gain muscle, and potentially even losing muscle if you're still in deficit, compared to a aggressive approach initially.
So what adjustment do you first make? Do you make say for example you've had a competitor that's been doing a lot of cardio? Is that the first adjustment you make?
Great question. Yeah. So typically, if we were to kind of just do this as if I'm in the driver's seat, so you can kind of understand what it's like. We're 2 weeks out. and they report in, and I give them the update of, hey, here's your peak week. Here's what we're doing. Make sure you're comfortable with it. There's generally a lot of questions about that, and then they report in when they're 1 week out, and we go, all right, let's talk about what we're going to do post show. And this is assuming this is their last show of the season. Everything I've said up till now about this. If they had another show in 4 weeks, obviously you wouldn't be gaining all that weight.
Yeah.
So once they're 1 week out, and this is probably something we've discussed slightly before, and they wouldn't be unfamiliar with this stuff, I would start giving them their protocol for post-show. So, all right, I want you to go the night. You did fantastic. Eat what you'd like. Just make sure that you don't get to the point where you're going to throw up, or don't get up in the middle of the night and binge. Enjoy yourself. Eat as much as you want, but don't be unhealthy about it, kind of thing. Then on Sunday, I want you to have 3 square meals, but don't track them. So go out and have breakfast with your friends and family if they're still around. Have lunch, eat what you'd like. Have dinner, eat what you'd like, and then go to bed. That kind of thing. So they're untracked. They're obviously going to be in a large surplus that day, but it's not going to be a complete blowout binge. It's basically, the advice is try to eat like an adult. Mm-hmm. So it gives them some kind of structure, even though they're going to have an intense amount of hunger and it's not going to get satisfied by the meals. They can just sit down and eat. So even just those 2 things, the peak week, which is typically going to cause a little bit of weight gain, and then Saturday night's celebration and Sunday day will put on a little bit of body fat. Probably most of it won't be body fat. It'll put on some weight on the person. So they'll probably already be up a kilo, 2-3 kilos maybe, right there. Then Monday, I'm taking their cardio. If they're on a lot of cardio, I might cut it in half. If they're on a moderate amount of cardio, I might just cut it down to 1 session or cut it out completely. And then I'm increasing their calories substantially. So typically, we're looking at going back to where they started the diet plus maybe 100 or 200 calories. So the goal is to actually get them into a surplus so that they're gaining at an appropriate weight to gain 5% of their body weight back in a month, roughly. So I'll give you an example. Let's say someone at the end of prep is doing 6 days of cardio, and they're at 40 grams of fat, 150 grams of carbs, and 175 grams of protein. I'll cut the cardio down to 1 session per week, and their fat will go up to 65. Their carbs will go up to, say, 275, and their protein will stay the same. And we'll just see what happens with their body weight. And if it maintains or it loses or it only gains a slight amount, then I increase it another 100 calories or so.
Excellent. Last question before we wrap it up. After you've done this adjustment, do you set a limit to your clients on how much, how high their body fat is allowed to go up during the off season? For example, do you say keep it under 15%, or you don't have a limit for that?
It's very visual. It's visual and subjective. So the goal of the off season obviously is to make improvements, mm-hmm. but at the same time, you don't need to be really high in body fat to make improvements, and doing so makes it very difficult to diet next time, right? Mm-hmm. So often, how much weight we gain is going to be dictated on, are they able to progress and do they feel okay? Some people can be relatively lean and feel absolutely fine. They're not starving. They're not food focused, and they seem to make great gains in the weight room. So they might be the person who can walk around at 9% body fat in the off season, no big deal, make progress, and they're totally normal. Other people, that might be more like 17% body fat. If we're going to talk about kind of the 2 ends of the spectrum, and these are males, of course. And that's fine as well, because asking them to be, even 12% body fat might have them feeling like they're in a constantly dieted state. Mm-hmm. So it's got to be relatively individual, but as a general principle, you want to only have as much body fat on the person as you need to get into an optimal state for gaining muscle, and not more, because in the end, you've got to lose all visible fat as a competitive bodybuilder to be successful. So if you put on 5 kilos and only 4.5 kilos of that is fat, but man, you're lifting more weights and it is extra muscle, that's not worth it. Because that might be 9 weeks of dieting that we have to add to your prep. So
exactly.
Yeah.
All right, Eric. Thank you so much. That was an awesome talk on pre-contest diet. Before we wrap it up, could you tell us where people can find more information about you?
Definitely. Well, first off, if anyone wants to see me in person live with people like Alan Aragon, James Krieger, Brett Contreras, Brad Schoenfeld, and many others, you got to come to Norway. I believe the date is 26th through 28th. Is that right, Juma?
Yeah, buddy.
26th through 28th.
Yeah.
Of August in Oslo. Definitely check out. I'm sure you'll put in the show notes. If you know Juma, you probably know about AFPT, but I'll be presenting there, discussing autoregulation and periodization and more training stuff, and just a great convention overall. I did it last year. So if you want to see me in person, definitely make it out. Even if you have to travel, it's going to be an awesome convention like it was last year. If you want to read about my stuff in the comfort of your own pajamas in your house, then definitely check out 3dmusclejourney.com. That's the number 3. Check out my Instagram, which is Helms3DMJ. Check out our YouTube channel, which is /Team3DMJ, and also I'm on Facebook, Eric Helms, and my ResearchGate is also Eric Helms. If you Google those platforms and my name, you'll find my stuff. And definitely check out my books. That is everything you could ever want to know about training and nutrition at muscleandstrengthpyramids.com.
Yeah. The for people that haven't read Eric's books, I highly recommend them. They're written in an easy to understand way, and it basically covers everything you need to know about training, nutrition, and supplementation. So highly recommend the books. All right, guys, this is Juma and Eric Helms signing out. This podcast will be available on YouTube as a video, but you can also watch it on iTunes in audio format. All right, Eric, thank you so much once again, and I'll see you in, I think it's 15 days. We'll see each other.
Something crazy like that. Thank you for having me on. Always an honor, man.
Yeah, thank you so much, and I'll see you soon, Eric.
All right, brother.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.